88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends. And normally this would be the time where I would say that I'm with somebody else tonight. But that's not going to happen tonight. I'm all on my own for tonight's episode of What to Watch Weekends. And before you ask, no, there isn't really any dramatic reason why. Just kind of felt like it. I felt like just talking on myself, by myself tonight, because honestly, I know for tonight's topic in particular, I can maintain the conversation with myself just fine. And that's exactly what we're going to get into right now, which is what is the topic for tonight's episode of What to Watch Weekends? Well, excuse me while my throat decides not to be clear tonight. Anyways, for tonight's episode of What to Watch Weekends, as I normally do, it is directly connected to the episode of What to Watch Wednesdays earlier in the week on Wednesday. And on Wednesday this week, I talked about the first three Mission Impossible movies, mainly in preparation for Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which came out just yesterday, as a matter of fact. And I figured, in terms of timing, it would make total sense to talk about that movie along with all of the other Mission Impossible movies that I didn't talk about on Wednesday in tonight's episode of What to Watch Weekends. It seemed to line up quite nicely. And because of that, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking a look at Mission Impossible from 1996, Mission Impossible 2 from 2000, Mission Impossible 3 from 2006, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol from 2011, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation from 2015, Mission Impossible Fallout from 2018, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 from 2023, and Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning from 2025. All of that on the docket, and I think I'm partially tired of saying Mission Impossible over and over again. But I'm going to have to learn to live with it, because we're going to be talking about all of these movies tonight, and it'll just be me. Don't worry, I'll probably end the show a bit earlier than I normally would when I have a guest, and I won't talk extensively at length. But I mean, it seems like a fun challenge to talk about 8 movies. I talked about Sharknado a couple weeks ago, and that was 6 movies. So who's to say I can't try and go for 8? Let's try going for 8. I'd say we're well within the range of doing that as a challenge. So when we come back from the music break, we will jump into the first 3 Mission Impossible movies as a sort of recap from Wednesday. Stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends. And we're going to jump into the first 3 movies on the watch list tonight, which will be the first 3 Mission Impossible movies. Now, I already talked about these movies on Wednesday's show, which would be this last Wednesday's episode of What to Watch Wednesdays, which is out on Wednesdays in case you couldn't tell from the name. Anyways, I've talked about them this week already, but since I'm doing an episode of What to Watch Weekends and I want the claim to be that I reviewed all 8 of the Mission Impossible movies, it kind of made sense to just do a quick recap and say some possibly new things about the first 3 during the first segment. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start with the original Mission Impossible from 1996, which is available to watch on Amazon Prime with a subscription or Hulu with a subscription. For the basic plot summary of the original Mission Impossible, we follow Ethan Hunt, a member of the IMF, or the Impossible Missions Force. Get it? Because it's called Mission Impossible, and the literal agency is called the Impossible Mission Force. Very creative name. Anyways, Ethan, an agent for the IMF, played by Tom Cruise, is framed for killing his entire team while on a mission. One of their impossible missions they're sent to. Okay, I'll stop with those jokes now. Anyways, Ethan is framed for the death of his entire team and is blacklisted by the CIA. So he must go out on a journey to figure out who did indeed kill his entire team. Because we know for sure that it wasn't him. So who did it? And I suppose it's a good time to mention that I will be spoiling all of these movies, including The Final Reckoning, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But first, let's acknowledge the big twist of this movie, which is essentially the person who frames Ethan for killing his entire team is his old team leader, a man by the name of Jim Phelps. Now, This is something I didn't really know until I did some research while watching this movie for probably the fourth time in a couple years. I read on the wonderful website IMDb that Jim Phelps is the name of a character in the movie Mission Impossible, but it is also the name of a character in the Mission Impossible TV series that the movie is ostensibly based on. Essentially what happens is Jim Phelps is the leader of Ethan Hunt's team in the first movie, and he is responsible for Ethan's team dying in the beginning of the movie. And Jim Phelps was also the main character of the Mission Impossible TV show, which ran for quite a while. So basically what happens is the moment the TV show hits the big screen, the main character is revealed to be a traitor and disavowed and kills all of the members of the team for our new main character. With that little bit of context, I was not super surprised to read that the actor who played Jim Phelps didn't really like the movie all that much when it first came out, and currently doesn't really like it to this day. I can't say I exactly blame him. Now, keep in mind, he didn't play Jim Phelps in the movie. He was played by, the character of Jim Phelps was played by Jon Voight in the movie version of Mission Impossible. But the original actor from the original TV show just wasn't stoked overall that just because he was being portrayed by Jon Voight, he was also being portrayed as a traitor and someone who kills the team of the new main character, arguably being the way to... I suppose the way I'm trying to say this is I'm sure he wasn't happy being the traitor to be a vehicle for Tom Cruise so that he could get his career back or something like that. I'm sure he wasn't super stoked about it. He wasn't super stoked that the big young Hollywood actor is now using his TV show as his vehicle movie to do all kinds of crazy stunts and get a lot of popularity in the process. And again, I can't say I exactly blame him. I can't really blame him in good conscience. I will say that despite the way the actor feels about it, I will admit it's certainly an interesting enough choice to not detract from the movie for me. I find that them going with, let's make our main character from the TV show the villain, is an interesting delineation. Usually when you have a movie that's based off of a TV show, it's either a continuation or it's placed in the middle of it or it's placed in some sequence of events. So it's using a lot of the same characters. You don't really watch I haven't seen either of these, keep in mind, but you don't watch the movie that came after the TV show Firefly without expecting it to continue the story of Firefly, right? You don't watch the TV show Deadwood and then watch the Deadwood movie, not expecting it to kind of cap off the plot of the TV show Deadwood. So it's essentially them taking it and going, let's go Hollywood with this, and then kind of ruin the show for people who have been fans for it for a long time while using the namesake. It's okay. This is going to sound gruesome, but in the context of him being responsible for killing Ethan's entire team, I think this analogy is probably the most apt. It's essentially parading around with the corpse of the original TV show and wearing its hypothetical outer shell and masking itself as the new Mission Impossible, which in context of Mission Impossible, using masks to pretend to be other people being the big gimmick of the movie, I think that fits a lot more than I was expecting it to. It's an interesting dynamic, I'd say. I will also say that I honestly... So this feels so incredibly disconnected from everything I just said, but I need to bring it up. When you have the original Mission Impossible, which came out in 96, it was around that time where if something entered into the zeitgeist, it would probably be parodied eventually, right? And the best example I can think of is The Matrix from 99. You've got a lot of those iconic slow motion shots and those bullet time sequences, and it came out in the 90s. It's the only reason I'm really comparing it. They're both action movies, sure, but one of them is sci-fi, one of them is more of a spy thriller. In the case of Mission Impossible, you have that scene kind of near the end where you have Tom Cruise hanging on a wire and being lowered into a room on to access a computer, right? And I haven't seen like a million parodies of it like I have with The Matrix, sure, but it's also quite an iconic scene, right? It's not like it hasn't been parodied before. And the more I think about it, the more I realize I prefer movies that parody tropes overall than I do movies that just parody a single scene from a different movie just for the sake of a joke, right? It's a weird comparison. And again, it feels kind of disparate from the points I was just making, but I think it's important to mention that with a classic action movie like Mission Impossible or a classic action movie like The Matrix, most of the time, especially during that era, they became a classic not because the action sequence was good, but it was a good action sequence in an already good movie that was doing everything right up to that point to basically warrant having such an iconic scene in it, especially in the case of Mission Impossible and especially in the case of The Matrix. The Matrix itself was just so deep and rich and layered, and the Mission Impossible original movie was very exciting and very thrilling, and to basically just extract the scene and do a parody of it waters it down so very much that it honestly only really works within the original context of the original movie. That's mostly my opinion, but I would hold it kind of hard and fast as my own personal principle that when you have movies like Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, or something like The World's End, right? The Edgar Wright types of parodies, where they're parodying like zombie movies or action movies overall, those tend to be a lot more successful because it's parodying tropes and they have a lot more source material to draw from. With something like just taking the scene from Mission Impossible and parodying it, I just don't see it going that far. Anyways, now that I've gone off on that little tangent, I will also close out the original review for the first Mission Impossible movie by saying that I love Ving Rhames as the character of Luther. He is one of the most consistent characters in the entire franchise, and I greatly appreciate him. I always called him that awesome one guy from the first movie every time I watched it, and I just felt like shouting him out. He's the most consistent, and he never does betray Ethan Hunt throughout the rest of the movies. So he's got that going for him. With all that being said, let's quickly jump into Mission Impossible 2 and 3 before we go to our next break. Mission Impossible 2 from 2000, available to watch on Amazon Prime Video and Hulu with subscriptions. The basic plot of Mission Impossible 2 is that it follows an ex-IMF agent who steals a virus called Chimera, and Ethan must go and find the guy who stole Chimera and stop him from releasing the virus called Chimera. I hope you've noticed there's a bit of a tone drop off in my voice because I'm not super excited to talk about Mission Impossible 2. Whenever people ask me, when family members ask me, oh, is the Mission Impossible series good? Why do you watch it? I tell them because it gets consistently a little better each time. And they go, well, surely in the age of multiple sequels, it's not like they are all great. And most of the time I bring up with the caveat, yes, you are right. Mission Impossible 2 is awful, which is mostly my own opinion. But I'd also say from a just a technical aspect, none of it really fits. None of it feels very coherent. It doesn't really hit the same way that the original movie did. I think that it's just a silly 2000s movie, and that's from a kid who was a 2000s kid and grew up with the cheesy levels of nonsense that this movie reaches at times. So if I'm not gelling with it, there's something wrong. Like I love cheesy, nonsensical movies from the 2000s. And when you're not attracting my attention, you've done something somewhat wrong, is the way I'm going to phrase it. I think that, okay, let's start with one thing. I remember when I was getting around to watching all of these basically in a row, and I read on IMDb once again that from a certain review, someone gave it a high rating and said, man, I love this movie. It's so silly and dumb and enjoyable. In the first 10 minutes, it gets the plot out of the way so you can just enjoy the rest of the movie. And I'm sitting there going, what do you mean it gets the plot out of the way? This is a movie. You don't get the plot out of the way. Otherwise, why are the things in the movie happening? If it gets it out of the way in the first 10 minutes, why does the rest of the movie exist? I feel like that's a valid question, and I still held that question while watching the movie, going, legitimately, I think it did get the plot out of the way. What's happening? Why should I care? Do you have an answer for me? And the response was no. I didn't care about anything that was going on. I didn't understand why any of it was happening, and I certainly didn't care that it had no response, which is not good. It kind of numbed me in that sort of a way. I think the best way I can describe it is most likely when I tried to rewatch this, I couldn't handle it. I tried for about 10 minutes and I was like, I can't do this. I just can't do it. It's so stupid, which again, mostly my opinion, but mainly my opinion. What am I saying mostly? It's mainly my opinion here, but I'm sitting there going, I can't do this anymore. I can't get past the 10-minute mark. I'm going to just randomly skip around to this scene and then call it a day, right? And I couldn't even keep track of what was going on with the plot within the first 10 minutes. I was struggling, and I was like, what do they do again? Oh, yes, they steal the virus, ? And there's a cure, and then Ethan Hunt is being called Dimitri, but it's not Ethan Hunt. It's another guy in a mask. And it's like, you've confused me within 5 minutes already. And now I'm watching Tom Cruise rock climbing in slow motion. And I didn't really want to watch that because the over-reliance of slow motion can get really infuriating. The Matrix did it right. But the more I just go on and on, the more it seems like my brain is melting, because when I tried to read the plot summary just to get some form of a recap for this movie, I'm sitting there getting confused just reading it. I'm going, I don't remember half of this nonsense. I remember events, I remember snapshots, I remember things happening here and there that are mildly connected to what is on this page right now. But that doesn't mean that I remember how they connected to each other, their significance, or what they really meant for the overall plot. Let me tell you, just remembering that there were birds flying behind Tom Cruise as he runs down a hallway is not exactly something that fits well into the context of a story. That just means there were birds there. So I can't really be blamed for not exactly remembering the plot. I remember sitting there getting super confused and going, I think when that person said that it gets it out of the way, their brain went numb and they didn't comprehend the plot anymore, because it got so complicated and insignificant that it kind of felt like there wasn't a plot for the rest of it. And I for some reason, just then had the vivid memory of going, man, I remember that being so complicated that I gave up and didn't pay attention to the quote-unquote plot anymore. That's probably what happened. That's probably why I'm struggling to remember it. I would not recommend watching Mission Impossible 2. It's not like it's going to come back in any of the other movies. It's not like any of it's really all that significant. You could honestly skip over Mission Impossible 2. I feel confident saying you could skip over it. I would maybe recommend it if you're a completionist like me and feel the need to watch all the Mission Impossible movies. If you want to pick and choose, you can choose to not watch the second movie. And I don't think anybody would blame you. So there's that. Moving on to Mission Impossible 3 before we go to music break. This one I won't spend super long on. As I spend the next 15 minutes on it, don't worry about it. So, Mission Impossible 3 from 2006, available to watch on Amazon Prime and Hulu with a subscription. For the basic plot summary, we follow Ethan as he must hunt down a crazy arms dealer, or more so, wretchedly evil arms dealer named Davian, in order to save his wife. Now, Mission Impossible 3 is interesting. I went in on this on Wednesday, and I think in retrospect, my opinion has only changed slightly. And I haven't finished rewatching it. I've seen it at least once before, but I didn't feel the need to rewatch it all the way through. Again, I say I'm a completionist. Here I am. But I mean, I'm a college student. I don't have infinite time on my hands. I have to budget accordingly. So I want to make it clear that I don't hate Mission Impossible 3. I think that Mission Impossible 3 is a good checkpoint in terms of the series of Mission Impossible movies starting to develop over time into a more coherent image. I think that some details of it really work, like Tom Cruise running, because he always runs and it's really fun. And in this movie, he's running down a series of small shops on a waterfront. It's very cool. But overall, I think in terms of production and in terms of just the quality of it in comparison to just 10 minutes of Mission Impossible 2, it was clear to me that there was a lot more effort and thought and care put into it, or at least more direct knowledge of what they were actually doing. I'd say that Mission Impossible 2 probably did have care and effort and thought put into it, but it was put into all the wrong places. Mission Impossible 3 knew what it wanted to be and put its best foot forward in trying to achieve that goal. So at least it has that going for it. And I felt engaged enough by it to at least sit through it more than Mission Impossible 2. I think that honestly, my big problem just comes from those hiccups, those bumps in the road in terms of how tonally dark it is, because not that the rest of the Mission Impossible movies stray away from being to having like edgier stuff, but I'll put it to you this way, like I did on Wednesday. If I'm watching a woman have a miniature explosive in her brain go off and then it leads to her dying kind of gruesomely in a helicopter, and I'm watching essentially like Davian not kill Ethan Hunt's wife and just fake it with somebody else and pretend like he's killing Ethan Hunt's wife. And neither of these ladies have had any form of buildup or establishment before they are fake killed off or real killed off. Then it feels like it's being edgy for the sake of it. Is that reasonable to say? If I have no attachment to the woman with the mini explosive device planted in her brain, and then she dies kind of gruesomely, I think that's kind of edgy just for the sake of it. And if Ethan Hunt's wife does not actually get killed and Davian was just using it to taunt Ethan, it feels a little edgy for the sake of it, especially when he counts down from 10, just to be dramatic about it. I think that's a fair enough comparison to make. So that's my point about it. With all that being said, we are going to go to break now. When we come back, we'll talk about the next 3 Mission Impossible movies. So stick around for all of that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, and we are going to continue our reviews of the Mission Impossible franchise. We left off on Mission Impossible 3, and now we're going to pick things back up with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol from 2011, available to watch on Amazon and Hulu with subscriptions to either platform. For the basic plot summary of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, we follow Ethan Hunt after a bombing at the Kremlin happens, and the IMF is blamed for this bombing at the Kremlin. Rather unfortunate on all fronts. The U.S. government decides to activate Ghost Protocol, which essentially disavows the IMF altogether, leaving Ethan on his own and having to figure out who on earth bombed the Kremlin. We need to figure that out. That'd probably be a good priority to have, so we can figure out who framed us for this and get our ability to be an agency back. You know, that feels like a priority. And the reason I'm sounding somewhat silly and sarcastic right now is because I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I hold it very, very close and true to myself, which is that despite this movie being framed around a bombing at the Kremlin, this movie is fun. This movie has fun. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, from everything I remember, knew how to have a lot of fun. And I'm not one to always say, I used to be a person who would say that the director makes the biggest difference when it comes to the tone of a movie. I won't always say that. It's not always dependent on the director, but it's usually dependent on the good directors And I would say in this case, absolutely, because the person who directed this movie is a man by the name of Brad Bird. Now, if you don't know who Brad Bird is, let me clarify something for you just right here and now. Brad Bird is the director of the original Incredibles, The Iron Giant, Ratatouille. He, like, okay, if none of those ring any bells, and Mission Impossible 4, of course, if none of those ring any bells to you, then let me spell it out a bit clearer. This man directed a couple of Pixar's most well-known and recognized and arguably highest critically praised movies. And he then directed a Mission Impossible movie that was live action with Tom Cruise. I'd say essentially his animation roots took over just a little bit and he brought it over to the film world, and I'm very glad he did. I will admit that Ghost Protocol is probably my favorite, mostly due to Brad Bird's direction. I think he knew how to have fun with the series. He knew how to take it just the right amount of serious while still having just a bunch of fun with the ideas and concepts he wanted to go with. I mean, on the one hand, you've got that setup of there being a bombing and them being framed, but then you've got this interesting idea of them being disavowed. Ghost Protocol is just such a cool name to begin with. You have a really good team consisting of Ethan, played by Tom Cruise yet again. We have Benji Dunn, played by Simon Pegg. We have Jeremy Renner in the mix. We have Jane Carter, who's played by Paula Patton, who I don't remember being bad even remotely, so she was doing something right at the very least. I still remember the opening of this movie where Ethan is in a prison and they start playing the song Kick in the Head over the loudspeakers as he beats up a bunch of inmates. I mean, how can you not love such a silly idea like that? And then we have the big stunt. Now, I believe it's somewhere near the halfway point. At some point in this movie, we have our big stunt in which Tom Cruise decides, hey guys, let's go to the Burj Khalifa, aka the tallest building in the world. And can I just like jump into an open window while scaling the Burj Khalifa and then hit my head and possibly fall off the Burj Khalifa? I mean, if it was faked, then it sure looked like he was about to fall off the Burj Khalifa, so it had that going for it. I think it's crazy that they went there, and it's so incredibly anxiety-inducing because, again, to my memory, the Burj Khalifa is the tallest building in the world. Let's fact-check it. No, that's not how you spell that. Is the Burj Khalifa the tallest building in the world? Let's see. Yes, it is the world's tallest structure. And if they faked it, they faked Tom Cruise looking like he was about to fall off. But notoriously, it's been reported that that was real. So that's really fun. I'm not going to sit here and say that the series peaked with Tom Cruise almost falling off the Burj Khalifa. But what I will say is going to immediately contradict it, because in my opinion, I think the series kind of peaked when Tom Cruise almost fell off the Burj Khalifa. So all of that goes to say that, I mean, I haven't even dived into a lot of the individual elements, but just for those two elements alone, I gotta be honest, I think those are the two big standout things to me. I also remember really liking the ending. We have William Brandt, who is the character played by Jeremy Renner. Throughout most of the movie, he's framed as a character who was a part of the IMF and essentially was a field agent and decided to not be a field agent anymore because he was unable to protect Ethan Hunt's wife from Mission Impossible 3. At some point between Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol, they aren't together anymore, and William Brandt is fully convinced that he let her die, and he's worried that Ethan Hunt will never forgive him for it. At the end of the movie, they all meet up one last time. The whole team meets with Ethan Hunt, and Ethan shows William Brandt that, don't worry, dude, you didn't cause my wife to die. She's completely safe. I know exactly where she is, and I'm letting her be free because I'm a secret agent who can't have any ties to people, which is something I wish he learned in Mission Impossible 3, to be honest. He should not have gotten married to begin with if he's a secret agent that's facing death at every corner. But All that goes to show, I found that twist to be very earned, very deserved, and I just really liked that character development. I ended up liking William Brandt as a side character a lot more because of that reveal. He was so very nervous to tell Ethan the truth the entire time and felt like he would be kind of looked down upon for those actions, when in reality, Ethan's like, no, you're good. I trust you. It's just, it stuck out to me. It really stuck out to me, and it made a very good impression. I think all of that goes to show that it kind of explains why at some point I got like a full box set of the first 6 Mission Impossible movies at, I believe, a Walmart at one point. It's on DVD, sure, but it was the first 6 Mission Impossible movies. I then at some point just got a Blu-ray of Ghost Protocol individually, just because I was like, I like this one and I kind of want to have it on Blu-ray. If that doesn't really go to show how much I liked Ghost Protocol, that I was willing to get it individually from the literal box set with the first 6, which kind of defies the need to buy it individually, I think that kind of speaks levels and volumes to how much I liked Ghost Protocol. With all that being said, we will now move on to the next Mission Impossible movie, that being Mission Impossible Rogue Nation from 2015, available to watch on Hulu and Paramount Plus with a subscription. For the basic plot summary of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, it follows the IMF, which is now disbanded. Rather unfortunate, as the IMF is disbanded, that means it's the perfect time for a group of disavowed agents from nearly every intelligence community in the world called the Syndicate to emerge and start causing havoc upon the world. They are referred to as almost a rogue nation of sorts because the movie's called Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. Anyways, they are sent out to wreak havoc upon the world, and Ethan Hunt must rush to stop them, as he always rushes to stop everything. I realize I've used that descriptor a lot, but let's be honest here. It's Tom Cruise. He's rushing to do a lot of things. He's known for running in movies, so saying that he's rushing to do something is not inaccurate even slightly. Anyways, here's I think the main point about Rogue Nation. If I remember correctly, I watched Rogue Nation for the first time after watching Ghost Protocol. And I will admit that Rogue Nation is a better constructed movie than Ghost Protocol. I think it's consistent in its theme and its tone and its overall feeling and mood, and the production has scaled up drastically. That being said, I remember not liking it as much as Ghost Protocol because it just wasn't as fun and whimsical as Ghost Protocol. I think Ghost Protocol achieved a lot more in context of building off of the darker tone of Mission Impossible 3. Now, keep in mind, this also comes from the perspective of watching these movies kind of in a row in a sort of marathon, but going from Mission Impossible 3 to Ghost Protocol, it's a massive jump across space and time, where it's like Mission Impossible 3, you have this gritty, edgy, dark movie, and then Ghost Protocol, you have this fun and kind of silly one where you got someone jumping off the Burj Khalifa. There I go mentioning it again, but it had fun with the concepts it was pulling off. It was having fun and having this balance to it. And I remember it being kind of funny. So when we have Rogue Nation, where it kind of leans back towards the darker elements, but then like stops, not even in the middle, just kind of middle of the road overall. I don't know. It just doesn't hit the same. It doesn't feel like a massive departure from what Ghost Protocol is. And that's not even a bad thing. What I'm saying, I'm trying to kind of paint it as a neutral thing, but if I'm being honest, it builds off of Ghost Protocol really well. And I can't say that neutrally, which, again, my opinion. But it builds off of Rogue Nation, not Rogue Nation. Builds off Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation does, in a way that I think was set up and in a way that I think was smart and intelligent. And although I'm sad we didn't get Brad Bird to direct, Rogue Nation and any of the other Mission Impossible movies, I think Christopher McQuarrie was a good choice. I can't talk tonight, apparently, but it's completely fine. Here's the point. I will admit that it is a better made movie. I just enjoyed Ghost Protocol a lot more. And for the rest of the series, I think Christopher McQuarrie was a good choice. But if anything, his consistency is kind of both a strength and a weakness in the sense that it doesn't ever get to that funny and nth degree that Ghost Protocol was kind of hoping to achieve, but it never really drops off in quality to even remotely close to what Mission Impossible 2 was at, or even Mission Impossible 3, in my opinion. So I can't complain, but at the same time, I can just say, I just didn't have as much fun. With all that being said, let's say one detail about Mission Impossible Rogue Nation that does deserve a lot of praise, which is the inclusion of the character Ilsa Faust, played by Rebecca Ferguson. I love Ilsa Faust. She's a great character. Rebecca Ferguson is amazing. She's unbelievably good, unbelievably talented. She's amazing. And it made the movie I wasn't as harsh on it because of her. Let's put it that way. So it's got that going for it. And it's got a lot of other things going for it. But I just, again, with it not being as fun, I just can't say all of those things confidently because I just wasn't having fun. I'm so sad. Anyways, moving on from that irony nonsense, we will now talk about the sixth movie, which is Mission Impossible Fallout from 2018, available to watch on Paramount Plus with a subscription. After the ending of Rogue Nation, we now have a new group called the Apostles. And in order to track them down, Ethan Hunt must now join forces with a CIA agent known as August Walker, who is played by Henry Cavill. And August Walker is remembered from this movie for being Henry Cavill with a mustache. So once again, it's got that going for it. I to be honest, I forgot that the group was called the Apostles, and I think they're running out of good names to give things. We'll get to that later when we get to Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Final Reckoning, but I think they're running out of good names. Anyways, I think I took a break and watched Fallout, I think a day after watching Rogue Nation, because I was just like, I should kind of sleep on this and let myself rest and get more adjusted to this being more consistently good. And because of that, I went into Fallout going, okay, this is probably going to be great. And it was. But I shouldn't spoil the story for myself. Or conversely, I think I've thought to myself, I don't think it'll hurt to spoil the movie for myself. And I was sitting there watching Fallout and I go, is Henry Cavill, August Walker, going to be revealed to be a bad guy? I can't take this level of stress. I'm going to look it up and see if he was in fact revealed to be a villain later in the movie. As it turns out, yes. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And to be honest with you, the setup is done really well, and all I did was ruin the movie for myself. So good job, me. Great job. If I'm being honest, it was probably the best twist since the first Mission Impossible movie, where it's revealed that Jim Phelps was still alive and framed Ethan for everything. I ruined it inadvertently for myself, and I'm very pleased with my actions in regards to that. And by that I mean I'm still annoyed at myself for doing just exactly that, because if I'm being honest, again, I think Fallout had the best story. Again, my opinion, but I think it had the best story so far out of the series. And again, I will admit, I like Ghost Protocol and I like the idea. I just think that there was a lot more to unpack with Fallout. It gave me a lot more. And I think basically saying that, oh no, I spoiled it is it just wasn't good. It wasn't a good idea. I think there are two other details I really want to bring up about the series overall before we go to break and before we jump into the last two movies, that being Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Final Reckoning. Fallout, to me, I remember one specific scene from it, and that is a specific point where Ethan is trying to infiltrate the Apostles. And he's essentially hired to be a raider convoy on a truck to rob a bank delivery truck of some kind. And he has this vision of being involved in basically a planned hit and run. And he's flinching at the thought of having to harm innocent police officers who didn't do anything to deserve it. I remember that scene very vividly because it spelled out to me almost everything Ethan Hunt's character stood for. And it made me realize Fallout, alongside having the best story progression, has the most complete version of Ethan Hunt out of any of the other movies. It spelled out to me what they were trying to do. And granted, he does have a hero complex and is very self-sacrificing, but at the same time, his devotion to protecting innocent people is very important for his character, especially for someone who's involved with saving the world on a very regular basis from terrorists. It's kind of an important trait to have sometimes. So I just remember that being a cool moment, a little nugget, and realizing, hey, there's something more to this Tom Cruise character other than him just being played by Tom Cruise. So that's nice. They were thinking about writing a character, not just Tom Cruise. I also will say that even though it was the best story, I think part of the reason that I looked it up is because I'd been a little burnt out from the other movies. Not to say that they were bad, more so that watching these in a row can kind of take a toll. It can kind of get a little exhausting because it's an action franchise. But it's also a longer action franchise than something like John Wick. So it can take its toll eventually. I think with that being said, that's probably a good enough setup to why my experience was the way it was when it comes to Dead Reckoning Part 1 and The Final Reckoning. But we're going to take a quick break before we do that. So we'll be back soon to talk about those last two movies. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends. And for our last two movies tonight, we're going to be taking a look at Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. So, let's jump into Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 from 2023, available on Amazon, Paramount Plus, and MGM Plus with a subscription to those services. Let's jump into the plot summary. I wanted to comment on MGM Plus existing, but in my opinion, I have no comment. So there's that. Anyways, basic plot is now that Ethan is back working with the IMF, Ethan must now track down and destroy a rogue, self-aware AI known as the Entity. Again, when I say an AI, yes, I mean an artificial intelligence. And yes, it is given the oh-so-creative name of the Entity. I think it's so creative, it's so not vague, it's so non-generic, yes, is the correct phrase there. I think the Entity is probably the most creative name for an AI I've ever heard of. And by that, I mean, I personally think that Skynet is a much better name. Why did they not come up with something as cool as Skynet? Terminator did it right many years before Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, but that's a nitpick. That's a nitpick. So let's go into some of the basics here so that I'm not just nitpicking the entire time. First off, for being an action movie in the Mission Impossible franchise, I will say the plot was more relevant than I was expecting it to be, because it's about a rogue AI that's self-learning. And weirdly enough, I'd say retroactively, any movie that has an AI going rogue and trying to control the human population, like in Terminator, for example, those kind of retroactively become more relevant in the year 2023 onward. So bringing it up in 2023, not the least relevant thing they could have done. So I'll give them that. That's for sure. I think it just kind of came as a surprise that they were going to be that relevant with it. I would have expected them to just be like, oh, here's another coalition of rogue agents that have formed into some crazy terrorist organization like they did with Rogue Nation and Fallout. So they at least took a surprising direction. I'll give them that. I will also say that in conversely to Fallout and Rogue Nation, I was expecting it to be a good amount of, let's say, 2 hours, 15 minutes or 2 hours, 20 minutes. The movie's about 2 hours and 45 minutes. And in my opinion, that's too long. That's too long for an action movie in the Mission Impossible franchise. There's a lot there. And I don't think it deserves the full 2 hour, 50-minute treatment. I know I said 45, but that's basically 50 minutes if we round up. I mean, 2 hours, 40 minutes. It's bordering enough on 3 hours. It's over 2.5 hours for a Mission Impossible movie. First of all, that's very difficult to take a bathroom break in the middle of when you're watching a movie in the theater. Also, that's a long movie to sit at a theater to watch. Also, it's an action movie in the Mission Impossible franchise, a spy franchise that is known for its taut and very fast-paced nature. So it's a lot to kind of take in for 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I hold that pretty true with Dead Reckoning Part 1. There's quite a lot there. And a lot of it is them sitting around talking about stuff. And it's not like nothing happens, but it is a lot of talking and a lot of exposition to really understand what's going on. I will say that there is some nice action sequences in there. You've got the little car chase, and you've got the ending set piece where they're basically on a derailed train that's hanging over a gorge, and they have to parkour up the falling train to fight against actual gravity. Now, that set looked very impressive, very expensive, and very big, and looked like it took a lot of training to make sure that they could jump between the seats of said train without falling. So it's, again, got that in its favor. I will say, to get to that point, you do have to sit through a lot of sitting around and talking. For some reason, the majority of my memory when watching this movie in theaters was a lot of shot, reverse shot of people just sitting in a club talking. That's not exactly a good sign, especially when it comes to Mission Impossible, but I can't criticize it too heavily. I will admit it was still an enjoyable theater experience. It was fun. It had something to go off of, and I will admit that the addition of Haley Atwell playing the character of Grace is a very nice addition. I think that Ilsa Faust is a better character, but I think Haley Atwell is a nice addition. I will not forgive her, however, for replacing Ilsa Faust, because in Dead Reckoning Part 1, spoilers, she is killed off. And that made me sad. That made me very sad. I didn't like that part at all. I was like, what do you mean she's dead? She was competent and strong and played by Rebecca Ferguson, and now she is dead. That's sad. That's sad. I like Grace, but I don't like her enough to say, yes, she should have replaced Rebecca Ferguson. I'll admit, like, Hilliard was great, but no, don't replace her. No. Plus, it's part 1 of 2, which is supposedly like the end of the series. Don't replace her now. Come on. Come on. I will admit, I think the ending of the movie, where it's essentially Ethan running away from a wreckage and being told, you must now hunt down and destroy the entity. This is your final mission. You will be disavowed if you are killed. And by that, I mean, nobody cares. You are fighting against the clock here. You've got limited amounts of time. Do your best. I will say it set up Dead Reckoning Part 2 pretty well in that last final scene. I still remember it and still remember being like, how long do I gotta wait for Part 2? I'm impatient, but I'll do it anyways, because it certainly was an entertaining theater experience. So again, here's the thing, no matter what I say, keep in mind that all of the Mission Impossible movies have been enjoyable experiences in their own right, except for Mission Impossible 2. But I've already gone over that extensively, and since that was 2 and we have a second part, but is also the last part, let's jump into that right now. Very weird transition, but whatever. Let's jump into Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning from 2025, which is currently available to watch in theaters right now. If you were to go to a movie theater, you could probably find online the ability to watch The Final Reckoning in theaters. It came out just yesterday officially, and yesterday was an interesting day for it to come out because yesterday was my birthday, and I was happy about that. This is the reason I've been excited for this episode of What to Watch Wednesdays and What to Watch Weekends, pretty much the entire school year, because when I learned that the new Mission Impossible movie was coming out on my birthday, it seemed too good to be true. And I will say we'll get into the plot summary. I won't say it was bad, but we'll get to that later. Too good to be true. Could be an unfortunate form of foreshadowing. Anyways, so as a follow-up to Dead Reckoning Part 1, in the final reckoning, we follow Ethan Hunt as he must complete his mission to destroy the evil AI known as the Entity once and for all. I did, in fact, go and see this movie yesterday. And it was a fun experience to watch it in the movie theater on a big screen. However, let me make this clear. I did not like the final reckoning as much as I may have wanted to. Was it a letdown, kind of a too good to be true scenario? Not too much, but did it disappoint? No. Was it great? Sure. Was it amazing? No. Before I go any further, I will say that one of the reasons I liked the choice of the director, Christopher McQuarrie, is because when I saw his work in Rogue Nation, I remember thinking, I think this is the right person for the job. If they're going to keep going with these movies and make a franchise out of it, it makes sense to go with him because he can keep it up with consistency. And I liked Ghost Protocol because it set a really good precedent and kind of created a good template in terms of tone and pacing and storyline for the rest of the series. But I don't think they could have kept that energy up if they made more movies like Ghost Protocol. As much as I wanted them to, I will admit them going with Christopher McQuarrie was a good idea because he was able to keep it consistent. That being said, they consistently improved between Rogue Nation and Fallout, and when it got to Dead Reckoning Part 1, it wasn't exactly a massive leap up in quality, and it wasn't a massive step down in quality. It was a consistent on the path level of quality. And I will say with the final reckoning, that kind of applies. If anything, it's just not any better or any worse than Dead Reckoning Part 1. If anything, it could be seen as a little worse if you're looking to be a negative Nancy about everything. But I mean, at the end of the day, was it like awful? No, I was engaged by most of it. I think I should break down some of the basic details here. And I will admit I will clarify. There's going to be spoilers for this movie. I understand that it came out yesterday. So if you do not want to hear spoilers, I will separate that into the last half of this review. So just keep that in mind. Without spoiling anything, I can say that this movie has a lot of exposition. Like, keep in mind, this movie is, let's see here, 2 hours and 50 minutes long. And the exposition takes up about 40 to 50% of the movie. There's a lot of exposition. I would even go as far as to say 60% of the movie is spent on exposition. When I'm watching a Mission Impossible movie, I don't want the attitude to be, man, I can't wait for the next stunt. I wish they would stop talking right now. You don't really want that, which is why I would understand if people said it's not as good as Part 1. Because for as much talking as that movie had, it had some fun stunts. When I'm watching this movie and going, man, I wish I was watching an action scene right now instead of all this talking, that's not the best of signs possible. Again, all of this through the lens of it's still consistently good, but there is quite a lot. I was so worried because going into this, I hadn't taken the time because I'm so busy to rewatch the majority of the other Mission Impossible movies. And I was worried that I'd kind of need to do that. Now, on the one hand, yes, I should have rewatched Dead Reckoning Part 1 before going into the Final Reckoning. It is called the Final Reckoning, but unofficially it is Dead Reckoning Part 2. And that's on me. Some of the characters from Dead Reckoning Part 1 show back up in Dead Reckoning Part 2 or The Final Reckoning, and I didn't remember them, so sitting there in the theater going, who is this character again, was mostly on me for not making the time to rewatch Part 1. At the same time, there are moments in this movie that make direct callbacks and almost summarize nearly the entire plots of both. Let's see here. I think if off the top of my head, they summarize the plots of the original Mission Impossible, Mission Impossible 3, and Ghost Protocol to some degree. So at the same time, I mean, I didn't have to rewatch those movies. So I wasn't expecting that. I kind of would have preferred that they recapped part 1 a lot better than they did recapping the other movies in the franchise. I'm laughing right now because I'm realizing how ridiculous this sounds for me to say this is still consistently good, because the more I say it out loud, the more it sounds like it's not that good. And I want to establish it is. It's fun. It's an entertaining experience. And if I was to sit here and say I didn't enjoy myself, that'd be such a lie. I was not disappointed. I was not disappointed with The Final Reckoning. I just didn't love it to the massive degree that I thought I would, and maybe was just a bit exhausted yesterday. It could have been me, but being billed as the final entry in the series and being billed as a part 2 more directly than even between Rogue Nation and Fallout, because in my mind, those two are part 1 and part 2 respectively. Or no, other way around, Rogue Nation being part 1, Fallout being part 2, and with Dead Reckoning part 1 and Final Reckoning, Dead Reckoning part 2, I figured it would have made sense if they were going to do entire recaps of the other movies to include part 1 as a more direct recap. They spend more time recapping the scene where Ethan Hunt is trying to access the computer in the original Mission Impossible than they do on pretty much two entire characters from part 1 of Dead Reckoning. So, I mean, yeah, it's got that going against it. This is the part of the review where I think I'm going to just throw up the blanket statement, be prepared for spoilers, because there are some parts of this movie that I was like, oh, okay, this is working. But there were other parts that was just like, okay, what? So one of the, I suppose, worst details of this movie is with it having recaps and callbacks to some of the older movies, we have a lot of fan service moments. And I'll put it to you like this. I'm not one of those annoying people who doesn't like fan service when I am a fan of something. If I'm a fan and I am being subjected to fan service, that means I am getting fan service and I'm going, oh, look, that's the thing from the thing. I recognize that. That's easy to call out and recognize. I don't really care about fan service being in movies. I like it. I'm a fan of stuff and I want to have happy things. When it comes to Star Wars, that's different. When it comes to other movies, I do not care. Excuse me. The problem is that when you have a movie that has a lot of fan service in it, and then you have recaps of the other movies to the point where I feel like you could say you don't even need to have watched the original Mission Impossible to understand what the context of it has to do with The Final Reckoning. And it recaps most of Mission Impossible 3. When it attempts to try and make it so you don't have to watch the other movies and stand on its own, the fan service kind of falls flat because it's trying to be its own thing when it's a part 2 and also number 8 in a series. Do you see the weird contrast there? That's a strange problem to have where you're trying to appeal to everybody, but also trying to appeal to people who have been fans of this series for nearly 30 years, or at least more than one, from how long we've had to wait since Dead Reckoning Part 1. We had Dead Reckoning Part 1 in 2023. And I think part of that shows in the fact that Dead Reckoning Part 1 came out in 2023. This came out in 2025. That's a 2-year gap. Most of the other movies, the shortest gap that was in between them was between, let's see here, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation and Mission Impossible Fallout, which was 3 years. I think that could have something to do with it. Anyways, we have all of those details. I will admit, going into The Final Reckoning, I was hoping or expecting for Ethan Hunt to die. Spoilers, he does not die. Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise, does not die in The Final Reckoning. Now, I'm not saying I'm disappointed, because for one important reason, one person I brought up earlier in tonight's review was Ving Rhames' character, Luther Stickle. Luther has been there since the first movie. He's never betrayed Ethan in any of the movies. He's been an important character, that fun side comedic character, that comedic relief in certain instances. I found him important. I found him relevant. I liked him. I liked his performance. He was always awesome to me. I legitimately referred to him as the awesome black guy in the original Mission Impossible, and then came to know him as Luther Stickle. Ving Rhames' character in The Final Reckoning, again, spoilers, does in fact die. And that part did get to me emotionally. I remember being in this weird trance state when that happened and almost feel my brain hard reset. As much as I'm not fulfilled by the fact that Ethan Hunt didn't pass away, I will also admit them making the ultimate choice to sacrifice Luther, they went all the way with it. They went all the way, and they committed to it. And for that, I respect them. I can't, in good conscience, say that the movie is beyond great or beyond amazing. But that moment alone definitely made me feel some form of emotion. It made me realize how much I cared about that character. It made me realize how much I cared about many of the other characters. And with all that being said, I mean, there's also a really cool stunt where Tom Cruise is hanging off of a plane by the wings, and it looks like he's going to fall off of a plane in the air. So, I mean, it's got that going for it, too. I mean, if it was faked, I couldn't tell. If it was real, then let me tell you, watching somebody do barrel rolls in the air or do like loop-de-loops while Tom Cruise is holding onto the wing, how did he not fall off? If Tom Cruise is 62, he sure isn't acting like he's gonna die anytime soon. He's acting like he's 40 years old and spry as a spring chicken when, let's be honest, he probably isn't. So there's all of that. I think the problem is that this was kind of rushed. It was hinged on a plot that doesn't exactly make sense and requires a lot of exposition to really catch people up. There are some moments here and there that I think are really good, especially the passing away of Luther, but we have really great character moments. We have the entity. We even have that fun fan service moment where they bring back the guy who was in the computer room from the first Mission Impossible movie, and he lives out in the middle of nowhere and like the, I don't know, the Antarctica, the polars, out in the ice, somewhere out in the ice and snow, right? And he was the guy who was on the computer that very nearly noticed Ethan Hunt swinging into the room to access his computer. So we've got that kind of a thing going on. And at the same time, we've got a movie that tries to be for everybody, feels a little too reliant on standing and talking for most of it, and over-expositing a lot of things with a very confusing overall plot that doesn't result in the best movie in the series. And on the one hand, I feel like they could have had a continuation. On the other hand, I think them ending it there was probably smart. I, again, like Christopher McQuarrie, and I think they've kept it consistent. But if they kept it going for any longer, I don't think they'd be able to keep up the energy. And with all that being said, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep up the energy for the rest of the night up until 10 p.m., which is fine because we've just ended the review on the last Mission Impossible movie. Look at that. We got through it all early. So that was tonight's episode of What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends and What to Watch Wednesdays. Please be sure to tune in to What to Watch Wednesdays next Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 88.1 The Burg for another episode of What to Watch Wednesdays. And tune in next Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. for another episode of What to Watch Weekends here on 88.1 The Burg once again. If you want to follow along with either What to Watch Wednesdays or What to Watch Weekends, be sure to follow the channel on either What to Watch Wednesdays, all in word, no caps, no spaces, on YouTube and Instagram. And again, I'll be back next Wednesday where I'll be telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.